First of all, thank you again for inviting me to be your speaker today. When Erin invited me to speak here for the celebration of Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, I immediately said yes. Martin Luther King was very dear to me. He was my pastor when I was in college at Spelman in Atlanta many years ago. So I know I'm giving away my age, but so what? We're all in this together. It was an amazing time. And the theme that Erin and I agreed on today is what's really going on today. How did we get to where we are? How do we get to this place? Well, from the days of the 50s and 60s, civil rights marches, boycotts, and sit-ins led by Martin Luther King Jr., from the days of the anti-Vietnam War protests, from the days of the protests for women's rights and the gay rights movement, the 1960s was a decade of counterculture movement. Sometimes people forget that. It was a decade of counterculture movements, and quite frankly, it began even before the 60s. Anti-racism, anti-segregation, anti-sexism, anti-Vietnam War, pro-hippie. Many of you don't remember that, I'm sure. Anti-capitalism and gay liberation. They called it the counterculture. From then till now, from Selma to Charlottesville to Me Too, from places of historical significance in the fight for justice to an action taken by an individual to protest injustice to millions by taking a single knee, to a social media movement representing millions who will no longer be silent about the injustices and abuses of the powerful. So how did we get to where we are? And how do we get back to love? Martin Luther King Jr. said this in 1967 at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in Atlanta, and I quote, "What is needed is a realization that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice, and justice at its best is power connecting everything that stands against love. And this is what we must see as we move on. What has happened is that we have had it wrong and confused in our country. And this has led Negro Americans in the past to seek their goals through power devoid of love and conscience." End of quote. Martin Luther King's words, delivered more than 50 years ago, he could be delivering those words today. Today. There has been, and is now more than ever, an emphasis on power and money rather than love and respect. There is a tendency, yes, There is a tendency to view others as the enemy and expendable, rather than as our sisters and our brothers. There is a thirst and a hunger to possess things, including properties, forests, and majestic parks, rather than being good stewards who protect the natural beauty of our land that should be available for everyone to enjoy, not just a few rich persons. So what's really going on? As we gain more advancement in technology, we are losing our sense of what is decent and just and loving. What's really going on as we have moved one step forward in recognizing that the color of one's skin does not define the content of their character, we have moved 5 steps backwards, forgetting that character does count when we elect those who will have the responsibility to lead us. What's really going on as we have opened the way for women and black people and brown people and red people and yellow people to vote and even hold office, we have changed the laws again to make it more difficult for them to vote and make a difference in the lives of more people who could make a difference. So what's really going on? Our physical eyes may be open, but our spiritual eyes are often closed. Our intellect tells us one thing, but we must listen to our hearts to know. The wisdom of our hearts knows. It knows that any form of violence is not the way to live. Violence, whether in the form of rhetoric or physical aggression, is not the way to lead. It is not the way to make a lasting positive difference. Martin Luther King Jr. was often referred to as an intellectual giant, and truly he was. He entered college, Morehouse College, at the age of 15. He received his PhD in systematic theology at the age of 26. But you know, he understood that the way to lead was to love. To love. He understood he must love his brother regardless of the color of his skin, regardless of his position, regardless of how his brother treated him. He understood the way to make a difference in the lives of all Americans was to love. And through love, non-violent resistance, Martin Luther King understood civil rights were everyone's rights, and that in order to make changes, lasting, positive changes, the movement that he was leading, albeit reluctantly, I might add, had to be led from the guidance of spirit, of love. And in that same speech that I quoted earlier, he said, and again I quote, "I say to you today that I still stand by nonviolence. I'm concerned about justice. I'm concerned about brotherhood. I'm concerned about truth. And when one is concerned about these, he can never advocate violence. Through violence, you may murder a liar, but you can't establish truth. Through violence, you may murder a hater, but you can't murder hate. Darkness cannot put out darkness. Only light can do that. And he went on to say, I have also decided to stick to love. For I know that love is ultimately the only answer to mankind's problems, and I'm going to talk about it everywhere I go. I know it isn't popular to talk about it in some circles today. I'm not talking about emotional bosh when I talk about love. I'm talking about a strong, demanding love. And I have seen too much hate. I've seen too much hate on the faces of sheriffs in the South. I've seen hate on the faces of too many Klansmen. And I say to myself that hate is too great a burden to bear. If you are seeking the highest good, you can find it through love. And the beautiful thing is that we are moving against wrong when we do. Because John was right. God is love. He who hates does not know God. But he who has love has the key that unlocks the door to the meaning of ultimate reality. End of quote. Yeah. So what's really going on today? What's really going on today is the same thing that was going on when Dr. King said, I'm concerned about justice. I'm concerned about brotherhood. I'm concerned about truth. And when one is concerned about these, he can never advocate violence. We can never advocate violence. But you know, we have lost sight of what is most important. Brotherhood and sisterhood, justice and truth, all through love. When we look closely at these three concerns that Dr. King spoke about more than 50 years ago, we can recognize our unity principles. Principle 1, there is only one presence and one power, God the good, omnipotent. Principle 2, we are spiritual beings created in God's image. Principle 3, we create our life experiences through our way of thinking, the law of mind action. Principle 4, there is power in affirmative prayer, and this increases our connection with God. And principle 5, knowledge of these spiritual principles is not enough. We must live them. Martin Luther King lived our unity principles. Yes, yes. He lived our unity principles. Do we, in unity, live our principles? Do we? What's really going on with us, unity? How are we doing in living our principles? I believe that each of us must ask ourselves, am I living principle 1? Do I believe and act on the belief that there is only one presence and one power, God, the good, omnipotent? Or do I believe and act on the belief that there is separation? Am I living principle 2? Do I believe and act on the belief that I am a spiritual being created in the image and likeness of God? Or do I believe and act on the belief that I am only human? Are you living principle 3? Do you believe and act on the belief that through your thinking, you create your experiences? Or do you believe and act on the belief that you're always having bad luck? If you could only get a break. Are you living principle 4? Do you believe and act on the belief that there is power in affirmative prayer? Or do you believe and act on the belief that you have to pray hard and beseech a God out there somewhere with a long white beard? Huh? Or do you understand that the God is the spirit within, and you pray from your God essence? Are you living principle 5? Do you believe and act on the belief that it is not enough to recite our 5 principles, perhaps on a Sunday? Or do you simply recite them but not live them? In order to know what's going on, we must take the time to go within, to be still. And then we know what we are to do. We must listen to the voice of our soul. That voice is divine love. That is what we must do. Howard Thurman, one of Dr. King's mentors, was a most eloquent spokesperson, a most eloquent theologian, a most eloquent author. And so I share this writing, this small writing of Howard Thurman's that was published in his book, Meditations of the Heart. And it's titled, More Loving in My Heart. And it speaks to our theme today. I want to be more loving in my heart. I want to be more loving. Often there are good and sufficient reasons for exercising what seems a clean, direct resentment. again and again. I find it hard to hold in check the sharp retort, the biting comeback when it seems that someone has done violence to my self-respect and decent regard. How natural it seems to give as good as I get, to take nothing lying down, to announce to all and sundry in 1,000 ways that no one can run over me and get away with it. All this is part of the thicket in which my heart gets caught again and again. Deep within me, I want to be more loving, to glow with a warmth that will take the chill off the room, which I share with those whose lives touch mine and the traffic of my goings and comings. I want to be more loving. I want to be more loving in my heart. It is often easy to have the idea in mind, the plan to be more loving, to see it with my mind and give assent to the thought of being loving. This is crystal clear. But I want to be more loving in my heart. I must feel like loving. I must ease the tension in my heart that ejects the sharp barb, the stinging word. I want to be more loving in my heart that, with unconscious awareness and deliberate intent, I shall be a kind, a gracious human being. Thus, those who walk with me may find it easier to love, to be gracious, because of the love of God, which is increasingly expressed in my living. I want to be more loving. And I close this morning with a poem by a good friend of mine and a lovely person that I know that you know. She's also a Unity minister. She now is in Lincoln, Nebraska, and she was a congregant of Unity Village Chapel many years ago. Life. I am not for sweet sentimentality. Give me a life that stands its ground when confronted with injustice. Give me a life with a strong shoulder to lean on, a workman's hand to pull me up, and wise judgment to guide me through. Give me a life that pushes me into the water and jumps in with me, that steadies me when I face life's fire, and leads me through it safely, always safely, saying it is an illusion and heaven is the truth right here, right now. Give me a life that sits with me beside my child's sick bed and assures me that there is no loss but only life and life beyond life. No matter what the appearance, life and love go on and on always. Give me life. By Reverend Tony Stevens Coleman. Thank you.